Hi, and welcome to Podcasting 101 with Rachel. This podcast is for busy female entrepreneurs who run their own businesses and want to start a podcast, or who may already have a podcast. I want to share practical information and tips on how you can get your podcast started and managing it along the way. I'll also be interviewing other female podcast hosts to give you real insight into what it's like having your own podcast. Hi, and welcome to this week's episode. This week marks 1 year since I started this podcast. Woohoo. And so this is a kind of anniversary episode where I just want to look back a little bit about my experience this past year and sharing any advice and tips I have around producing and managing your podcast. So this is episode 39. So I have produced 39 episodes of this podcast, which I'm very proud of. There have been a few changes recently, which I'll get into a little bit later. So what have I learned? One of the biggest things that I have learned is that your podcast can evolve, and we shouldn't be afraid of pausing, to take a break, to rethink things, to change the way that you're doing your podcast, be that the frequency, the style. So with me, as you know, if you've been listening for this past year, I shared an episode every week, and I had 3 solo episodes a month where I would look at a different topic, like, for example, how to record your podcast, how to edit your podcast, those types of things that would be offering my tips and advice around different elements to podcasting and what's involved in getting your podcast out there. And then once a month, I invited different female podcast hosts who run their own businesses and who have their own podcasts, and interviewing them and talking about what it's actually like setting up your podcast, how the planning went, and all those different questions, which would give you just real insight into what it's actually like running a podcast. Because we all know we have certain expectations or certain things that we think it's going to be like, when in fact it can be quite different when you're actually in the thick of it. We all know that with our businesses, and we think, oh, this is the way we get our quote unquote ideal client, and this is how it's going to go. But obviously it doesn't always work out that way, and things evolve differently. So yeah, having that ability to kind of take a look at your podcast periodically, and working out, is it still working for you? Is it doing what you want it to do? Are you getting across the message that you want to get across? So I have been doing a lot of thinking this year in my business. I've not only got this podcast because I'm passionate about podcasting, and I just, not only just wanting to have a podcast, but I wanted to have a podcast that was supporting my business as well. To be fully transparent, I want my podcast, as well as helping you guys with your podcast and giving you some extra tools and tips and advice to help you get yours going. I also want my podcast to help me in my business, to increase my brand awareness, to build my authority in the podcast arena, and to honestly help me with potential clients. I do really feel that podcasting is such a powerful medium, and it could be a deciding factor in somebody deciding whether they would like to work with you. For example, if you're a coach, podcasting is a great way to showcase your skills, to let people get to know you and your voice and what your vibe is. And it all helps with the know, like, trust factor. And it's an extra touch point that people have to go and to find out about you. I've been talking to some different podcasters, and they are starting to see that change with how their podcast is helping them in this exact way, in their business with their clients. And some people have said that, you know, there are many different touch points in which people might come across you before they decide to buy with you. It might be a long process, like 12 months. They might find you on social media. They might read, you know, the odd bit of your post, listen to your podcast, maybe perhaps religiously. And then that has helped them decide to want to work with you. This is what I would really love my podcast to do for me and my business, and for you and your business. So I've decided there's going to be a couple of changes. If you're on my email list, then you might already know about this. If you're not on my email list and you'd like to get weekly reminders about the podcast and what's going on and what guests are coming on, then I would love for you to join my email list. There'll be a link in the show notes. But what I'd like to do now is I'm going to change, as you might have noticed if you are a regular listener, that the episodes are coming out every other week. So this is what it will be going forward. I also will be doing guest episodes every other week. So I'll be bringing you a new guest every other week. And that guest will be other female podcast hosts or people that are in the podcasting industry that are doing really cool things and that will be able to offer you, I know I've said this word a lot, insights, like we'll be able to offer you advice and tips and just some help around your podcast and giving you something to think about, maybe something that you haven't really thought about before. I'm part of Captivate is my podcast host, and they have like a growth lab, and there's a lady that I've come across called Nick Redman, who is a voice coach, and she gave a masterclass talking about warming up your voice and the importance of how you sound, which is not something that, I mean, obviously everyone kind of worries about what they sound about or think about what they sound about, but I'd never really thought about it from a voice coach perspective. So that was really interesting. And I would love to have Nick Redman on this show. So that's something that I'm hoping to do in the future. So those kind of things, it's all going to be still around podcasting and just bringing you interesting conversations that will hopefully help you with your podcast. I also have something else really exciting happening. I met a lady called Sarah McDowell at an awards ceremony, awards drinks before Christmas. And she just happens to work for Captivate as well. But that's not the reason we connected. We kind of nerded out on podcasts because she has her own podcast about SEO because she's an SEO manager. I will leave a link to Sarah's podcast in the show notes. You can check that out if you're interested in SEO for your podcast. And we really enjoyed our conversation, like nerding out about podcasts. And it got us thinking that we'd like to set up a community for podcasters out there, podcasters of any sort, whether you're podcasting for your business, whether it's that passion project. It's just really lovely to have a space for people where you can come together and talk about those different things and also help and support each other with things like accountability, like questions around editing or promotion or any of those things. So this podcast community will be called the West Midlands Podcast Club because that's where Sarah and I are based, in the West Midlands. But it will be online, so don't worry if you're not in the West Midlands or even in the UK, we will be having online meetups. So you can join the community from wherever you are in the world. But we are hoping to host some local events as well, so to help grow the community in our area. So if you're in the West Midlands, then you might be able to get to come and meet Sarah and I, and we can get together face to face. I'll leave the information in the show notes for you. So if you'd like to come along and check it out and see what it's all about, then I would absolutely love that. So on this podcast, the upcoming guests that I have are Hollywood, is somebody that I've promoted her episode for quite a while now. We chatted just before Christmas, but because of all the break that I was having and a bit of a rocky start to the year, I have not released her episode yet. So that is coming and I'm excited for you to hear that episode. And also, I have my chat with Nikki St. Paul from the Stories That Connect podcast. Nikki started her podcast around the same time as I did, March last year. And so she's been going for a year as well. So congratulations to Nikki. Nikki is also a really supportive listener to this podcast. And I greatly appreciate all your input, Nikki, that you give me and all the support you've given to the podcast. So thank you so much. And yeah, I'm excited to share your episode, Nikki. So that will be coming in a couple of weeks, and I'll let you all know when that episode is out. And again, if you'd like to sign up to the newsletter, you will get those into your inbox every Wednesday. And it will tell you what episode's out that day, or if it's on a week where an episode's not released, what's coming up, or if anything else exciting has been happening with me or the podcast, or any industry news that I might feel that you would enjoy. So I hope you've enjoyed this anniversary episode and listening to me talk about, this podcast and my journey. I don't regret doing this podcast for one moment. It brings me a great deal of joy to produce this podcast and to help my clients with their podcasts, especially Hannah and Nicole from Showing Up Solo. Big shout out to them. They're a massive supporter of mine, and I'm a massive supporter of theirs. Absolutely love what they are doing. So if you haven't already listened to the Showing Up Solo podcast, which is also available as a video podcast on YouTube, then you should definitely check that out, especially if you are a solopreneur in business and you are struggling with your marketing, or maybe you just feel like, you've been in business for a little bit of time now, maybe a year or two, and your marketing's getting a little stale, or you're struggling to keep consistent. These guys have so much tips and advice to help you out. So I would highly, highly recommend that you go and listen to their podcast. Again, I will leave a link in the show notes for you to easily find them. So thanks again for listening, and I will catch you all soon. Bye. Thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like to connect with me or get in touch, then head on over to my website. If you liked the episode, then I'd love it if you could leave me a review in your chosen podcast app. Your feedback is much appreciated. See you next time.